I'm going to demonstrate how to create this festive wreath card. I'm using 6 colours, a 0.3 permanent drawing pen and a size 6 brush. Working on a larger sheet of watercolour paper, I drew out a rectangular card shape of 12.5 by 17.5 centimetres. I created a Christmas wreath which inspired my design. I started off by just loosely sketching out a circle on the rectangle that I'd previously drawn out. The idea of suggesting it on a doorway. I commenced with the poinsettia at the top, working from the centre point outwards and just indicating the central veins of each petal. I then plotted the ribbon at the top, followed by the silver baubles and the fir cones, 3 of each to balance the composition. I merely needed just a suggestion of the outer edge before commencing with the ink work. I'm working with a 0.3 Staedtler drawing pen, permanent drawing pen, and I'm working very loosely. The size of pen is optional. Again, I'm starting with the poinsettia, working from the centre outwards, suggesting some of the veins and adding the ribbon at the top, followed by the 3 baubles, a splattering of holly berries. I've added a few more just to add a splash of colour and also to add to the balance, and the fir cones, again the 3 to balance the composition. This is just a contour drawing with just a suggestion of detailing. A few veins for the leaves, an indication of the tips of the fir cones. I'm adding the ivy leaves, and filling in the areas in between with either holly leaves or suggestions of the finer fir tree foliage. Once the contour drawing is complete, I'll add a suggestion of the doorway behind. I'm dividing up my rectangular sheet of paper so that I can put in the central line. I plotted a star shape door knocker, almost a diamond shape over a square, which results in a 8-pointed star. and I've added a circle attached to the centre. I've measured the distance from the outer edge so that I can plot the recessed detailing of the door. And finally, I've added a letterbox. I'll now just loosely define these extra areas. I've mixed a pool of Scarlet Lake, a hot red, and with the point of my number 6 brush, I'm adding the red holly berries. For the fir cones, I've mixed a pool of burnt sienna and a mauve mix of alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue. I'm applying the burnt sienna in the base, wet on dry, leaving white gaps for the tip of the fir cones, followed by the purple mix dropped in to those areas which are still damp. The purple mix on top of the burnt sienna will create a lovely rich browny shade. Now the yellowy green ivy leaves, a mix of ultramarine blue with transparent yellow, again wet on dry, leaving gaps surrounding to suggest the lightness of the leaf. Now for the holly leaves, I'm using a mix of Winsor Blue green shade combined with transparent yellow, and I'm applying the paint wet on dry and then diffusing. While it's still damp, I'm applying a stronger mix of Payne's grey with transparent yellow towards the central vein and just touching the outer edges. I'm working a few leaves at a time. This works well providing the paint remains damp, and you can go back and diffuse it and add the stronger tone. Rather than paint a light coloured ribbon, I have chosen to paint a red one, which will give a contrast against the white poinsettia and also link with the red holly berries to create more balance. Again, I'm working wet on dry, putting the darker tones in and diffusing with water. Where an area is wet, I'm dropping in stronger tones, including a touch of permanent rose, a cooler red. I'm suggesting the curve of the ribbon, stronger towards the centre, diffused, leaving highlights to suggest the curve. I'm mixing some Winsor Blue Green shade with Scarlet Lake to create a slightly muted turquoisey shade. And I'm starting on the silver baubles, again adding the paint around the edge, wet on dry, and just softening with water to retain a highlight. I'm adding more Scarlet Lake to the mix to make more of a subdued purple mix and just dropping in along the edge to suggest the muted reflections. As these silver baubles will be surrounded by green foliage, it's best not to overdo the strength of colour so that they remain quite light. Just putting a slightly stronger tone in, wet on wet, just to suggest a coarse shadow. And I'll start linking the foliage and baubles with the background fern. I have a few different shades of green, Windsor blue green shade with a dash of transparent yellow, also ultramarine blue with transparent yellow. It's quite a bluish shade of foliage. I'm also adding just a little touch of Payne's grey into the mix to strengthen within the deeper recesses. Here I'm using the ultramarine blue and transparent yellow, drawing my brush outwards to suggest the fern with the tip of my brush and adding stronger tones. Once I cut around the silver baubles, it will give a contrast and make them appear lighter and more silvery. I'm dropping in colour while the base paint is still damp. And I'll just continue in this way, just varying the greens and giving an impression of the foliage, connecting everything. white poinsettia is now almost surrounded, standing out as purely white. I'm just adding the little areas of colour towards the centre to suggest the finer stems, almost like a little star shape. I'm using a dilute mix of the Winsor Blue Green shade with a tiny touch of Scarlet Lake. I'm just indicating a little bit of tone on the poinsettia where one petal overlaps another and towards the centre. Just very, very minimal because I want to retain the whiteness of the plant. I'm now adding just a tiny touch of green, the transparent yellow, with ultramarine blue. Very pale. A little bit more of a mauve mix, the Winsor Blue Green shade with a dash of Scarlet Lake to make a lovely grey shade for the recesses in the doorway. And a hint of burnt sienna in the door knocker. Followed by a hint of transparent yellow to just make it a little bit more golden. And again the same in the letterbox. Using a slightly stronger mix of the Winsor Blue Green shade with a tiny touch of Scarlet Lake, I'm just strengthening up the shadows in the poinsettia just to balance it, but I'm just retaining the movement and looseness of the flower. The ribbon just needs a little bit of strength to give it a bit more form, and I'm using a permanent rose, wet on dry, and just softening it. Stronger towards the centre. I'm diffusing it to give an impression of the curve of the ribbon. I'm just putting a few touches more strength just here and there, a little bit more strength on the holly berries, just to balance the painting. A little bit of pink even, just very dilute on the amaryllis as white flowers reflect their surrounds. A little bit of shadow using a purpley mix on the top. paint under the letterbox and in the recess panels. To finish it off, I'm just going to add a few words. I've lightly penciled the word love, joy and hope. And on the letterbox, I've just penciled out the word peace, which I'm going to go over with my pen. I feel it needs to be a little bit stronger, so I'm just thickening the lines up slightly. To complete the presentation of the card, I'm going to mount it on a sheet of red card. I put double-sided tape on all four sides. I'm going to peel it off and press it firmly on the pre-prepared card, allowing just a small gap of red on the very outside. I've also scanned my Christmas card and made it a little bit smaller and mounted it on some green card.